Hello, everybody. We talked previously about a topic to be selected for your research, and then we talked about how to use craftily a title to reflect this topic. In today's lecture, we will be spending more time on understanding how to make use of previous research, those before us who studied the same topic, maybe from the same angle or a different angle, so you can eventually learn from them, and number two, don't repeat their work to end up having the same results. This is what we call literature review. The problem, or actually the challenge, is not in the literature, it is in the review. In other words, on how to write a good review. I'm going to take you into the heart of the issue first by asking the following question. Are all literature reviews the same? Do we treat literature done by others before us in the same exact way? The answer is no. We have different types of literature reviews. Some of them are acceptable, some of them are unacceptable. I will show you how to write an acceptable literature review and how to make use of it. We have actually different types of literature review. You can, in a way or another, refer to them as four. And there is a fifth one that is not acceptable, and I will tell you what it is and why it is not acceptable. Number one is what we call integrative or argumentative review. What do we mean by that? We go to the literature selectively. We are not going to do a whole analysis of the whole literature, but we're going to select so we can support or refute an argument with a deeply embedded assumption or philosophical problem already established in the literature. So here you are going to come with a contrarian viewpoint. So your piece of research is going to go as follows. It has become almost like a law-like generalization that countries without solid middle class or a bourgeoisie, as Barrington Moore said, one of the famous political scientists of the 1960s, he said, if you don't have a strong middle class, if you don't have a bourgeoisie, then there is no democracy. This has become almost like a norm, as I said, law-like generalization in the literature. What you can do, what you will need to do, is to selectively find all the literature that supports this claim, with all different aspects, with all methodologies used, with all their arguments, how it has become a norm in the literature, how it has become almost like a fact in the literature. And your research, the rest of your research, is to build a counter argument. In other words, you are going to do a piece of research that is, number one, monitoring what has been established in the field with all its arguments and supporting evidence and so on. And your mission in your paper is to come up with a counter argument, either by using philosophical analysis or by using empirical analysis. In other words, you'll be collecting data, analyzing them, or you will be making use of data that already exists that we call secondary sources, and so on. But here, the main mission of the literature review is to establish for us what has been almost like an agreed upon conclusion in the literature. But as well, you might show what the counter arguments are by others. In other words, you might tell me, okay, but those people who disagreed with this point of view, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and tell me what these people or these researchers who disagreed with this outcome built their research on. Why did they refute the basic assumption and conclusion that no bourgeoisie, no democracy, no strong middle class, no democracy? But your mission is going to be to come up with your own analysis to show the fallacy of the argument. Okay, so here it's like 2 or 3 missions. Mission number 1 is to get me all the literature, show me the literature that supports this kind of argument or assumption or conclusion in the field. It has become as such because of the long history of those people who support this claim. Then your mission is to build a counter argument. Or you might do, which is even better, do a literature of the argument in support of the conclusion that no bourgeoisie, no democracy, then show how others try to refute or to disagree with this conclusion. And then number 3, you will come up with your own research that will test if this conclusion drawn by others is applicable to your case studies or not. You might say, okay, India is a country with weak middle class, for instance, weak bourgeoisie, and has been so since 1950s. Why it is a consolidated democracy? Why is it a stable democracy? And so on, okay? So we need to understand that the mission of this literature review is to show me that there is an argument that you want to refute or examine or test in another case. This form of review as well shows how previous research debated, disagreed, or agreed on certain issues related to the topic of your research. You might take a topic, again, no bourgeoisie, no democracy. You might want to say, okay, globalization leads to more inequality. It has become almost like a law like regionalization. But I see that there is a debate in the literature about that this inequality existed before globalization. Okay, so inequality and globalization are not a matter of effect and cause. Globalization is the cause and inequality is the effect. No, it is not true. Okay, here you are going to show me how previous literature debated this issue. They were not like agreement. They were 2 broad lines of scholarship that existed. 5 of them on this side or 4 of them on this side, and now you are going to make them talk to each other. Okay, that is, those people's argument are 1, 2, 3, 4, like XYZ from the researchers in the previous work found this conclusion, while others did not find the same conclusion. Actually, they disagreed with this conclusion based on their evidence and so on. Okay, so you will need to show me where they agree, where they do not agree, where there is a debate that you need to settle or to examine in your research. Okay, this is what we usually call a gap of some sort. Gap where, because the debate is unsettled, so I need to do my own research. So a gap exists, in previous research exists when there is a question not asked or asked but not examined. Okay, so you need to show me that this debate, for instance, between School A and School B is mainly theoretical. Nobody examined the question empirically using data, not just philosophical discussion. So there is a gap. I'm going to fill in the gap by collecting the data or by using data collecting by others. So I'm going to take it from the philosophical arena to the empirical arena. That's where we find this gap that we are trying to fill in. Another type of literature review is historical or chronological. I guess this is miswritten. Okay, chronological review. Historical reviews usually focusing on examining research throughout a period of time, starting from the first time an issue or concept or theory or phenomena emerge in the literature, then tracing its evolution within the scholarship of a discipline. So we take any concept like democracy. How was democracy first introduced to political field? Was it a good thing or a bad thing? Who talked first about democracy? Oh, this were the Greek. That's when we had direct democracy. Okay, were they happy with it? Or no, they were actually enemies of it. What did Plato, what did Socrates, what did Aristotle talk about or say about democracy? So when the term first emerged, it emerged somewhere back to 2,500 years back in the Greek era. Okay, then that's the starting point. You need to keep moving with that to tell me how different traditions dealt with democracy. Even the American founding fathers did not call the United States of America at the beginning a democracy. They feared, because the word democracy would mean the rule of the mob, the rule of the masses. Masses were not educated, were not property, did not have properties, were not to be entrusted with making sophisticated political decisions, so they called it a republic, not a democracy. Okay, so at the time, so about 18th century, when they were crafting or drafting the American Constitution, they refrained from using the word democracy. So what this tradition tells us about democracy? Okay, since when democracy became something positive? Who said that? Okay, is it Schumpeter? Is it somebody like John Locke? Is it somebody like John Stuart Mill, and so on? You will need to go with me throughout the different traditions historically to tell me from time to time, before this, after this, and so on. Okay, if you're going to use the word globalization, okay, so what does globalization mean? Can you make this distinction between, for instance, like First World War, pre-First World War globalization, and post-World War One globalization? Okay, so you might come up with a distinct point of time, and you say before that it meant something, and after that it meant something. That's where it is historical in this sense. You will need to tell me why the same concept was used to mean different things at different points of time, because then I would understand the historical context that led people before us, whether they were philosophers, maybe politicians, maybe researchers, to reshape the meaning of the concept to mean something else. So I need here to go through the different scholarship written by different people to understand what it is. When you talk about something like democracy, you might as well make reference to other, we can say, democracy and its sisters. What other concepts that are usually associated with democracy, like liberalism, liberal democracy? Since when we started with liberal democracy, not only democracy? Or democracy and its competitors, because, like, for instance, in Muslim we have, okay, what is Shura? So here you are trying to tell us that democracy as a concept with its manifestations in reality had different meanings, and even some cultures refused to use the word democracy because they perceived it to be antidote, to be in contradiction with their own genuine concept, like concept of shura. even you can pursue the concept of shura as well, historically and chronologically. In other words, you might tell you shura, when it was first introduced to Muslims, this was in the Quran, and even the Quran talked about shura before Islam itself, like when Moses, or sorry, when Solomon and the Queen of Sheba started to consult people around her what to do with Solomon and so on. So in other words, I need to understand how it differed. And we know that at the beginning, the concept of shura meant that it is obligatory for the decision maker to consult. But the outcome of the consultation is not obligatory. In other words, Umar ibn al-Khattab has to consult people around him, but if he sees something different from what they saw, then it's his decision. Okay, like for instance, Abu Bakr with Hurub al-Ridda, you see, with fighting the people who were Muslims and decided not to become Muslims after Prophet Muhammad died. So Abu Bakr like consulted everybody, but eventually he made what sounded to him to be right. Is it analogous to democracy, or democracy doesn't give this much of space to people on top of the political pyramid, and so on? So I need to take me from one stage to the second stage, the third stage. Now we talk about different types of wars. You see, it's like fourth generation of war. Okay, what is the first generation of war? What is the second generation of war? What is the third generation of war? What is the fourth generation of war? Well, now when you say there's something like psychological war or media war, okay, what do you mean by media war? What do you mean by psychological war? Okay, if it is associated with other phenomena, I need to know what made this kind of fourth generation war a fourth generation. Is it the use of rumors, the psychological operations, the capacity to dismantle a society without using military power, but using mechanisms so people lose confidence in their own, in themselves, in their society, in their state, in their leaders, in their institutions, and so on. Okay, we know the Soviet Union got dismantled not because like an atomic bomb or a war erupted in the middle of the Soviet Union, but for other reasons related mainly to economic, maybe psychological, maybe media war, psychological war. So I need to understand how this kind of war developed and evolved throughout time. Can go back to Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and how it kept emerging till we get to the point where we are in. Of course, you will need to agree with your supervisor over how many pieces of research you need to review, but I need to see the link. And I need to see, when I'm reading your literature review, I need to see that there was an evolution happening throughout history. There is a third way of how to write literature review, which is methodological review. Here you are not focusing on what someone, previous researchers said. This is the content. But how they said it. How they got there, how they came up with the conclusion that oil-producing countries usually tend up to being non-democracies. Okay, like Venezuela is an oil-producing country, Libya was, Nigeria, Indonesia, Arab Gulf states, Iran, Iraq, and so on. Okay, why not, except for, as I said, Norway, but Norway was a democracy long before they discovered oil. So the question becomes, how did they get to this conclusion? How did they link this conclusion? They say usually that democracies do not fight wars against each other. Okay, since they became democracies. Before democracies, yes, of course, Germany was in war with everybody in Europe almost. Okay, but since it became democracy, then no war between Germany and any other democracy. Okay, from where they got that? How? I'm interested in how they got there. When you do that, I need to understand how they collected their data. Is it a theory? Meaning, by the way, those who talk about democracy, democracies do not fight wars against each other, usually go back to Immanuel Kant. This is a philosophical thing more than it is an empirical thing. At the time, he believed that when you have a democratic decision-making process, those people who are involved in the decision-making of war will refrain from war if they are the ultimate determinant of whether to go to war or no. In other words, if I'm a king, I can sacrifice the people of the sons of my people to go to war. But if my son, as a king, is going to war, so I would think 15 times before saying, okay, I will send people to war. I'll send my son to war. So this is one of the mechanisms of causality between why democracies do not fight wars against each other. Number one is that if it is up to representative of the people, that is democracy, so the representatives of the people are going to decide whether to go to war or no. So the Congress in America is going to decide to go to war with Canada or no, and the representatives of people of Canada are going to decide whether to go to war against the United States or not. The representatives are going to fear that their kids, their own interests, personal interests, might get touched or endangered. So they said, no, let's find another way not to go to war with each other. Number two, that's again Immanuel Kant said, number two is that democracies usually are more rational. Okay, again, go back to when we were doing literature review about democracy and how it changed. That's what Kant is saying. Kant believed that democracy, that people are rational, or at least can be rational, can be educated. This is something goes against what Plato was saying. Okay, again, if you are doing this kind of analysis, I'm sorry, I'm getting you back here, the historical analysis, I need to see why Kant differed, why John Stuart Mill differed from Plato and actually most of the Stoics and Epicureans who believe that humans are not rational enough to be able to handle political affairs. Okay, but when you go to methodological, I want to see how people did this. Is this a substantive field? Is it what kind of research approach? Was it empirical? Was it quantitative? Was it qualitative? Okay, what kind of sampling did it? What kind did you do interviews, data collection, data analysis, and so on? You might simply say, you know what, those people have been doing that using samples of 50 people and less. I'm going to do a sample of over 500. And this would be your contribution, that all previous research was quantitative, was empirical and quantitative, but the samples were very small. You are going to update this study by using another sample. Or the sample was used in Mexico, and you're going to do it in Brazil. Of course, I'm giving in examples. Certain research has been done. So here, you think about it, you're going to make, when you do methodological review, you're going to say two types of research has been found in the literature. One is normative, maybe philosophical, maybe ideological, maybe people are saying what should be done and so on, starting from Immanuel Kant, who said we want democracy to spread because democracy would mean less wars, and you're going to go through all the literature that talks about democracy as a cause and war, or lack of war, in other words, peace, democracy and peace in the literature from a normative perspective. Then you're going to find another type, the second type of literature that I found is that it's more empirical. In other words, these are people who collected data, for instance, since 1945. Okay, these are the independent countries since 1945, and these countries are democracies, and these countries are non-democracies, and I'm going to see how many wars between countries that were democracies versus countries that were non-democracies, and see if it is true that democracies don't fight wars against each other. Then I'm going to support the claim made by the other kind of literature, the normative literature, like Immanuel Kant and people like him, saying, well, you know what, Kant was right. Or, no, using this empirical data, I am going to focus more on, I'm gonna do the research, and I found actually no, countries, whether democracies or non-democracies, both of them fought wars almost equally. There is no statistical difference between, statistically significant difference between democracies or non-democracies. Okay, so what I'm saying here is you can find when you are doing this methodological review is to focus on the technique used. You might say most of the literature was done, or like you say, some of the literature was done in quantitative research, others was done in qualitative research, and third was done is normative and philosophical research. These are three of them. My contribution is I will be using a different sample within the quantitative tradition. So I'm going to do quantitative like those who did quantitative, but the literature before me had both, or had quantitative, qualitative, and normative. Normative meaning focusing on what ought to be. Okay, so a methodological review is to focus on the method of data collection, method of the analysis, and so on. You might, and this one is for those who will be studying like political thought, political philosophy, political theory. Usually here you don't have quantitative data or data collection per se, but you are trying to see how there is different readings of the relationship between concepts, grand concepts. You can take actually the same topic that we were talking about. War is a grand concept. Okay, causes of war. Okay, types of war. What leads to wars? Again, if you go back since Aristotle has been talking about what makes countries go to wars or conflicts with each other. Okay, take it from there, keep moving, and study it in different traditions. You see how, for instance, the Pharaonic tradition dealt with it, how the Greek tradition dealt with it, how the Chinese tradition dealt with it, how the Islamic tradition, how the Christian tradition dealt with it. So it's more like going back to see how different traditions dealt with the concept of war and the reasons of war. And then you would move to the current era to see if there are other literature, or there is other literature from or disagreed with the thematic or the theoretical approaches and analysis done by all these traditions. Here it's more like no data collection. This is the main thing. You are not going to actually do quantitative or qualitative research in the traditional meaning. Here you are more into trying to understand the meaning and connotations and the repercussions, the results of how different theories, philosophies, traditions, religions, sayings of others impacted the phenomenon. Oh, so now we understand if you're going to again use the concept of war, you need to go back to see how, for instance, the concept of war in Islam, for instance, between the Islamic and the Christian traditions, the concept of holy war or crusade for Christians is like holy war for Muslims. Okay, how did Muslim scholars deal with that? How like Christian scholars did with the concept of holy war? For instance, a concept of authority, based on what this authority thing is approached or is done. Based on what? Is it God-given? Is it people-supported? Is it natural? Okay, so here you are more into doing a piece of research in political thought, political philosophy, or political theory, and you need to start as well by going back throughout the history of the phenomenon, and got to a point where my research is going to start from this point by building upon what I have done and see where the similarities and the differences are. Okay, for instance, I'll give you an example. When somebody writes saying, why do we have philosophers who supported authoritarianism? So your piece of research can be authoritarianism in and its supporters. For instance, something like that. You need to see how, for instance, again, Plato found that. How, for instance, Hammurabi's laws in Iraq supported that. How different religious traditions supported having strong authority, and so on. And then you would get to a point and say, okay, this is the literature review. My contribution is going to see modern philosophies that support authoritarianism, starting from socialism, fascism, Maoism, and so on. You see why this tradition that started long in the past is still alive. Why is it still alive? Because there are other philosophies, theories, and thought that is supporting that authoritarianism can be a solution to problems. What these problems are might be like, okay, development, like stability, like national unity, like fighting sectarianism, and so on. Okay? Of course, here when you do theoretical and philosophical review for a paper on political thought and political theory or political philosophy, you are not going to find huge difference between the theoretical and philosophical review and your own contribution. Just be careful here. Okay, because in the other forms, you're going to say, okay, this is what I found, and I'll be collecting data, I'll be doing something different. But if you are here, you are going to find basically what you're doing is you are doing the same thing, but in two different hats. One, reviewing the past, and the second, you are reviewing modern scholarship, but this is going to be you doing that, not research done by others. Okay, so here theoretical and philosophical review suits best people who choose their topics to be within the field or arena of political thought, political theory, political philosophy. Okay. Before writing the literature, consider the following, because, okay, so these are just the four. Can I use more than one? Of course, you can do more than one. It depends on actually what kind of topic you are dealing. You can use theoretical along with methodological, of course. You can use historical review along with integrative argumentative review. Of course, you can do nothing wrong with that. But just you need to be aware of what you are doing. In other words, you might tell me something like, okay, I am going to go against what has been established in the field, that Islam is not compatible with modernism. Okay, with modernity, let me be more specific. With modernity, Islam is not. Okay, Islam as a religion is not. People who are very religious, Muslims who are very religious, usually don't accept modern concepts like secularism, like liberalism, like democracy, like capitalism. No, they always believe that there is something called Sharia that's going to be solving all their problems. And if we don't have this Sharia, then we are not good Muslims. Okay, so this is something you're going to find lots of scholarship supporting that. Okay, that's okay. You will be trying to see, okay, I'm going to examine that. I'm going to search for Muslims and I'm going to interview them to examine, do they really reject modernity? And if so, why? Okay, so when you are doing that, this is, you need to go back to the literature and examine it that way. But you can as well say, I'm going to do that in a historical chronological way. Why? Because for so long, Islam was depicted by philosophers, Western philosophers, and people who were called Orientalists for so long. Okay, before colonialism, before like West colonialized Muslim countries, was referred to as a religion with high capacity to be modern, to be advanced, to be progressive, even more than Christianity. So you're going to go back in history to show me the literature they used to look positively at Islam and Muslims and say, you know, Averroes, Ibn Rushd, or any of these great names, oh, they were very advanced. And actually, they were the people who introduced the West through their translations and writings to concepts like separation between mosque and state, church and state. Okay, so at some point, the West used to look up Western literature, or literature coming from the West, used to look up to Muslims, thinking that Muslims are great. You see, Muslims are more advanced than Christians at the time, and we can learn from them. As Christians, we Christians of the West, we can learn from Muslims. And then at a given point of time, usually associated with the Ottoman Empire control over Muslim countries, that's when we started to say, you know what, no, Muslims are not that good. You see, it is not that Islam is bad per se, but something happened that made the West more advanced than the East. And here, through your historical review, you will see the difference. No, 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 no. I wouldn't say that it's all Muslims history, or history of Muslims is good or bad, or pro-modernity or anti-modernity. Now, there were historical turning points. So here you do two things. You started with here by a common phrase that says, oh, okay, Islam is against modernity. And then here, through chronicle review, you went back to say, no, some writings did not say the same thing. What they have been saying till maybe like the 17th century was positive about Islam in general. And then later on, after colonialism, maybe after the effect of the Ottoman Empire and this policy of isolationism, they ended up being less developed, and they caught diseases maybe that were in medieval Christianity, like control of church over state and so on. So here the chronological and historical review is important in the sense that it makes the difference between two stages in the history of literature about Islam and modernity, and so on. So you can definitely use more than one of them. I'm going to write a note here stating exactly that. Note, you can use more than one technique. No, technique in IQE. More than one technique in your lead. Okay. Before actually writing that, please, please, please consider the following. You need to talk to your supervisor. I just need to go to paragraph, go to here, and say keep with next, so it doesn't move away from the paragraph. If the assignment is not specific about what form your literature review should take, seek clarification of your professor by asking this question. How many sources should I include? Don't be shy to ask how many. What type of sources should I review? Of course, our supervisors are going to help you with that, because some topics you might not by yourself understand that, oh, Plato one day talked about democracy. Okay, of course you should have studied it, but it might not come to your mind that why would I include Plato? No, you need to include the origin of the concept and so on. Why would I mention, even in my literature review, Shura versus democracy? Okay, why? Well, like the Africans, especially immediately after the independence in 1960s, they used to come up with an African word. I'm not going to mention it, but it's mainly like consensual democracy, no majority or minority. No, we're going to keep talking till we come up with a consensus on a specific decision. So should I mention that? Yes, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, there was a tradition of democracy without majority or minority, without voting. We're going to keep discussing, keep searching for a compromise till we get there. Okay, should I include that or not? What type of sources should I review? Usually books, of course, journal articles, and websites. Actually, here, Google Scholar is an excellent source. Google Scholar is an excellent, I would say, starting point. Of course, you can go to JSTOR, you can, and JSTOR. Okay? Why Google Scholar is good and important? Because it shows you as well not only what research has been done on your topic, but it shows you which books or articles or websites that were cited the most. And usually you need to focus more on research that has been cited the most, because usually this is an indication that it is very influential. Like, for instance, this gentleman, Fukuyama, talked about the victory of democracy or liberalism, liberal capitalism, whatever, over all its competitors, whether it is fascism, Marxism, Islamism, Maoism, anything. Okay, this book that is called The End of History, citing Hegel, for instance, is in a way referring to your topic, the mega topic of our research throughout this year, which is globalization. Because in a way, there is one ideological framework that is going to negate all the rest. Now we have a global ideal that will be applicable to everybody. Okay, when you go and search for globalization and liberalism, for instance, most likely you're going to find this book by Fukuyama, The End of History, as the main source. Why? It is a claim that we are going to witness one pattern of ideological manifestations based on liberalism, whether it is liberal democracy or liberal capitalism. Okay, so Google Scholar is a very important source of sources. Okay, should I summarize, synthesize, or critique your sources by discussing a common theme or issue? Of course, you need to do that. You see, you need to come up with a theme of some sort to say, okay, I'm going to compare, for instance, Shura versus democracy. These are the scholarship done on Shura, and this is a scholarship done on democracy, and this is scholarship that was done to try to find a compromise between Shura and democracy, basically saying that, oh, Shura is democracy in Islamic terms, and democracy is Shura in secular terms. Okay, you can do that. You can say, I'm going to find what's written about, for instance, causes of war in the Middle East, for instance. So you might say there are three types. One of them that focuses on global factors, mainly like being part of an ally of other countries, like an ally of the Soviet Union versus an ally of the United States of America, an ally of Russia versus an ally of America, and so on. Or you can say it's for regional purposes, that is, there are coalitions and alliances between countries within the Middle East, like Iran and its allies, Saudi Arabia and its allies, Israel and its allies, versus a third source of literature that focuses on domestic reasons, like types of leadership. For instance, Saddam Hussein is Saddam Hussein. He is the guy. So it's a war. It's a leader-led war that he had with Iran and that he had with Kuwait. Nasser's wars with Israel, it's Nasser. Had been Sadat in office, withholding all other factors or variables constant, Israel would not have waged a war against Egypt in 1967, for instance, because it was Nasser who and so on. So what I'm trying to say is you need to come up with a common theme that would eventually create a classification or typology for different types of literature that was done in the past. You can do that by theme. You can do that historically by saying, okay, this is the scholarship that was done about Israel and Arabs before 1979. Why? Because this is when the biggest, largest Arab state, Egypt, signed the peace treaty with Israel. So all the scholarship before 1967 was something, and all the scholarship after 1967 was something. Okay, when you talk about international relations, before 1990 and after 1990, because before 1990, this was the Cold War. This was the bipolar system. You had the Soviet Union on one hand, and you have the United States on the other hand. Soviet Union has its allies, Warsaw Pact, and the United States has its allies like NATO, and so on. But after 1990, no more Soviet Union. There is Russia. Okay, so I can see that chronologically, that is historically, there is a historical moment where I can make the distinction. Should I evaluate the sources? Of course, you have to evaluate the sources. You have to tell me your opinion. I'm gonna talk about that in more details in a bit. But yes, it is not a laundry list. You are not just telling me, oh, these are the good ones, these are the bad ones. These are like the one written before, and these are the ones that. No. I need to see you. Where are you? Where is evaluation? Where you are reading that, not just to show me that, oh, okay, I know that this book exists or this journal article is there. No, I need you to read it, because this is going to make you either a sound, independent researcher, or you're just a student who is like doing an assignment, okay? Should I provide subheadings and other background information such as definition and or a history? Yes, you need to do that. You need to do that. I'm telling you why that, because most students think that this is not part of the mission. No, this is part of the mission. That's what makes it review. You see, it is review, not literature monitoring or literature counting. No, I'm not asking you to count them for me. Oh, there were 45 books written. No, that's not good. That's not what I want. I want you to get into it, to be part of it, read it, and come up with your own conclusions. Otherwise, stated by a supervisor, from 20 to 30 sources are enough. Okay, 20, that's, but somebody said 20, I'm going to read 20. Yes, you have to read 20. And that's why sometimes you end up finding a piece of research very shallow, because you have not read enough. Okay, what you did is something like you passed by the literature. I want you to pass by the literature. I want you to read the literature, to internalize the literature. So I would suggest, but again, who is your supervisor and what he says, or she, of course? They are the ultimate determinant of that, because it depends on the topic. Okay, some topics might not require all that, might require much less. Okay, or more, I don't know. But in general, for people at the BA level, bachelor degree level, usually from 20 to 30 sources of literature review are enough. Again, unless it is stated by your supervisor to increase or less. Okay. While, excuse me, just need to, because eventually I'll give you this. Okay. Find models. You are not the first person on earth to write a literature review. No. What others that did in the literature review? You see, your supervisor wrote pieces of research before you. Actually, anywhere on JSTOR or Google Scholar, you are going to find others who did literature review. So find models of literature review. How did they do that? I guarantee you they did one of these. Either they did this, or that, or that, or that, or a combination of the four of them. Okay? So see what they did. Find models of how to do literature review. Okay? Narrow the topic. That's important, because you remember last session when I said you will have a working title for yourself till you eventually got to your actual title, your actual topic. In other words, part of what you are doing is, before doing the literature review, you came up with a topic, the causes of civil war in the Middle East. Okay, but then when you started to read, oh my goodness, there are so many civil wars: Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain. No, that's too many. No, I cannot study all that. Then, after doing the literature review, or actually getting into a bit of the literature, you might go back to your supervisor and say, sir, madam, professor, please let me narrow down my topic. I'm going to tell you, your professor is going to tell you, okay, narrow it down. Because we know that people start very ambitious and then become realistic with work. Okay, so yes, narrow down if that's good for your research. So narrow down the topic is okay if you find that your research is too wide for you. Okay. How to do that? go when you can of course search use keywords as well to. I'm gonna write here. Use keywords. I'm getting old. Use keywords for your research engine. You guys, you are lucky. People who are at this stage of their lives. Why? Because we used to do that without internet, without Google Scholar, or without all these interesting things, or JSTOR. We had to do it manually. So somebody is at the library like for 9 hours straight doing what? Searching for books, searching for articles, and photocopying them sometimes, or reading them, or summarizing them. Now, guys, you don't need to do all that. You are lucky because you have that only online. All you need to do is to stay as long, stay stay working. Okay? This is an important thing. We are in a field, usually we like to see the history of the literature. As I said, go back to Plato. But don't tell me that, oh, I got the 30 pieces of literature needed while I'm in the 15th century. I don't need to do anymore. No, 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 no. You need to combine both history and current perspectives over years. Where the field is right now regarding your topic, causes of civil war. Okay, you know what? Aristotle talked about civil wars. And that's why he preferred small city-states over big empires. That's what he said. Yes, his student, Alexander the Great, didn't listen to him and created an empire, but there's another story. Okay, and actually what Aristotle felt happened after the death of Alexander the Great. So you might need to go back to Aristotle to understand what Aristotle said about civil wars. But meanwhile, I need to see as well the most recent literature on the topic till yesterday. Till yesterday, what was the last book, last even academic journal article that was written yesterday? I need both. You see, we are in the year 2020, okay? I need to see the literature done till yesterday. And how it differs from what Aristotle said. Aristotle was a man sitting on like somewhere in Athens debating or theorizing about the world. He had no empirical evidence. He was just thinking, oh, if it is too large, then most likely it's going to form of so many people coming from so many backgrounds, religious, racial, and so on. It's very difficult to keep a high level of parity between them. Then most likely they're going to kill each other. Okay, so that's what Aristotle said then. Okay, but what we know right now, what causes that? Why would make a country like the United States of America or Canada or Australia or all these countries that is full of people from different ethnicities, races, religions, and what is the likelihood of a civil war in the United States? Almost 0%, right? Almost 0%. Okay, so actually then it is not really that Aristotle is entirely right. He might be partially right. Why? When Aristotle is right and when Aristotle is wrong. So you're going to find research to talk about why civil wars happen or do not happen while civil wars happen or do not happen till this moment. Okay, so make sure that your literature is current. Okay, writing your literature review. Now you know what? You know that you will use one of these techniques to do your literature review. Now you know that you need to talk to your supervisor to understand what's really expected. You need to use Google Scholar to locate the most important and relevant scholarship. And you will need to see what other researchers did so you can learn from them. You can narrow the topic. If it is too big and you want to narrow it, you can narrow it. You will need to use keywords to see where it is. If you're going to do civil war in the Arab world, so civil war Mauritania, civil war Morocco, civil war Iraq, civil war, and so on. See, okay, why it didn't happen? Okay, Algeria has a minority of Berbers. Okay, why Algeria never had a civil war between Berbers and Arabs? Oh, but it had another civil war. It was an ideological civil war between extremists, Islamists, and Islamists. I'm sorry, Islamists and the army supported by most of the secular people in Algeria. Okay, so why it happens? It might be religious wars, might be as bad as I'm sorry, ideological wars may be as bad as racial, ethnic, and religious wars. Okay, and make sure that you include the most recent literature in your work. Okay, writing your literature review. Now you need to do the following. Number one, you need to tell me why you included a specific piece of literature in your literature review. You need to tell me, oh, it is using quantitative methods, so show me, tell me. Don't assume that I'll go out and search, and after you are done, I will say, oh, this guy used quantitative. I'm not going to go and actually get the book to read it. No, if you use quantitative, so you tell me, spell it out. This guy used quantitative research using a sample data of 1, 2, 3, 4, and blah, blah, blah. So show me the evidence. Or this guy is very normative. He is speaking of capitalism and globalization in a very positive way. Show me. You can quote, okay, what this piece of research is saying. Number two, be selective. In other words, don't just write something. Some people or some students, and this is one of their major mistakes, go to the introduction and quote something from it and say, oh, okay, that's it. This is the one. So the maximum they read is the introduction. No, you don't do that. You need to actually read the paper. Okay, read it thoroughly, learn from it. Okay, do your best to learn from it. Okay, that's why I want to see the most important points in each source, not anything. Not just, oh, I read it said some 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this is the most important thing, because this 1, 2, 3, 4 that you made the reference to are not new. What's really new is 7, 8, 9. But you were lazy. You did not read enough to get to 7, 8, 9. You just quote the first 3, 4, 5 or points 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 were just the introduction. The actual piece of contribution that made by this article or book is coming, but you refrained from reading thoroughly enough to get to the heart of the contribution. So don't fool us, be selective. Use quote sparingly, meaning less, don't overuse quotes. Some short quotes are okay if you want to summarize a point, or if the author said just what cannot be rewritten in your own words. Sometimes you may need to quote certain terms, what were coined by the author. You see, terms. Okay, somebody came up with, like, for instance, when they first introduced the concept of petrodollar. Oh, petrodollar is a concept that is not widely used before 1973. So who coined the concept of petrodollar? Oh, I need to know who said that and in what context and why they coined a new term, why the previous terms were not enough, okay? So I need not common knowledge or taken from the study. That's why I want you to quote only when quoting adds something. Okay, there is a new concept as well called rentier state. What's rentier state? Why it was used to refer to those countries that export oil and depend on that more than 80% of their governmental budgets. Okay, who coined this term? Okay, for instance, democratic consolidation. What's consolidation? Why do we need to say? I understand what democracy is, but what's consolidation? Who used that? Okay, so short quotes here are okay to say. Okay, for instance, Lenz and Stepin, when they said democratic consolidation, they came up with a very interesting line. They said that's where democracy is the only game in town. So you are quoting the only game in town, which is democratic consolidation? Yes, you can quote that. That's important, actually. Why? Because it's meaning that there is no way for any authority, for any person to hold a political office without free, fair, direct, periodic, competitive elections. Okay, what is the likelihood of a coup d'etat in France today? Almost zero. Why? Institutionally, constitutionally, uh, uh, in terms of culturally, intellectually, people would not accept that a coup d'etat would happen. So that's why it's called France is a consolidated democracy. So here, the word consolidated is a technical term that needs to be defined in the same exact way those who coined the term defined it. Okay? But don't use extensive quotes as a substitute for your own summary and interpretation of the literature. That's bad. Okay? Don't give me a quote like all the literature is quote, 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 quote. No, I want to see you. What did you understand? Summarize and synthesize. You need to do that. We need to see you recapitulate important features of a research study, but then synthesize it by paraphrasing or rephrasing the study's significance and relating it to their own work. In other words, it is not a matter of just telling me, oh, this one said so, and this one said so. No, said so. Unlike X, Y said 1, 2, 3, 4. Or following the same methodological approach, which is quantitative or qualitative or whatever, X did like Y. Both, there is a scholarship that was done before a certain year, let's say before the invasion of Iraq, that focused on pan-Arabism in a given way, like the writings of XYZ and so on. But after the invasion of Kuwait, that is, Iraq invaded Kuwait, oh, there was like a schism, there was a fitna, there was a division that led to a new way of looking at pan-Arabism. Examples for that, MNW, whatever, so other three sources. So show me that they talk to each other. Those who were before the invasion were more like daydreamers, talking more normatively, were very optimistic and thinking in terms of how to take pan-Arabism from the realm or arena of philosophy into real practical aspects. But after that, people became, or researchers became less optimistic, became more pessimistic, and so on. So I need to see you. That's why this is another aspect, which is keep your own voice. I need you to be there. While the literature review presents others' ideas, your voice, that is the writer, you as a student should remain front and center. I need you to be there. Actually, and even you might want to say, and this kind of definition that was adopted by XY is going to be good for me, for this piece of research. Or this piece of research is going to blah, blah, blah. Like this piece of research does not belong to this tradition that I have just described, or this paper has just described. Why? For the following reasons. I thought this paper totally disagrees with the tradition that linked democracy to bourgeoisie. It says that democracy is not a matter of a special class structure. It is a matter of elite. If the elite wants democracy, democracy will emerge. Elite will create the necessary changes in institutions, in constitutions, in culture. It's a matter of agency, not a matter of specific factors like economic development or class structure and so on. So you need to be there, okay? Don't be afraid to show what you learned, what you disagree, what you disagree. But don't do it as if you are like Marx or Plato. You are not. You see, show it in a modest way. Okay, don't exaggerate. You see, you're just a student. I'm just a student. Most of your supervisors, very modest and humble people. You see, we don't brag about what we're going to do or what. So usually what we do in research is we present what we have found in a modest way to others and say, think with us about what we found. Okay, so you are not Mr. Knowledge. You are, or Miss Knowledge. You are just a person who is trying to understand the phenomenon you are examining. Okay, so we tell people not to quote a lot. So you need to paraphrase, you need to recap, to re-explain. When you do that, just do not do that in a way that would distort the original meaning meant by the other researcher. So be sure to represent it as is, accurately. Okay? We need to do that. Why we need to do that? Because eventually, I'm going to show that in the coming lecture, that when we do research in general and literature review in specific, if I dislike an argument, if an argument goes against my beliefs, so I try to strawman it. You know, strawman it. Strawman is like in Arabic, خيال المآتة, to create I would say, to create a fragile version of it. You see, an extreme version of it, so you can easily attack it. Okay, if a researcher said some Muslim countries, including Egypt, are not ready for democracy, and you don't like it, so you're going to say this X or Y or Z is doing that because is saying that no Muslim country is ready for democracy. No, the man did not say no Muslim country. The author said some Muslim countries, including this country of yours, Egypt, are not ready for democracy now. But when you paraphrase what he's saying, when you rewrite what he's saying, you say he claimed that no Muslim country is ready for democratization or for democracy. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say all Muslim countries. He said a specific number of Muslims. So be accurate. Why? Because sometimes we do that deliberately or undeliberately so we can attack the counter argument. No, that's logical fallacy that you have to avoid. You cannot misrepresent others' conclusions or arguments or assumptions and so on. Okay, one last thing that seems very interesting, because people sometimes say, he didn't do literature review, or the researcher didn't do literature, or she didn't do. No, sometimes they do, sometimes researchers, even yourself, can do literature review without using the term literature review. You might not find in the book or in the article or whatever literature review. No, they can simply use another thing. You see, different perspectives on equality and globalization. Okay, it might be just, we need to make this G, sorry. Capital G. That's it. This is the literature review. They put it in this term. Okay, in other words, literature review on inequality and globalization, but he's just, instead of using the word literature review that looks very scholastic, no, they used another term. Okay, so different perspective that sees that inequality actually emerged before globalization. Another perspective that says that no, actually globalization created more inequality. Or another third that said actually there is no relationship between inequality and globalization. A fourth approach that says, and each approach has its own scholarship under it, its own literature under it. And you need to show me that this trend that link inequality to globalization, 4 examples, 1, 2, 3, 4. This other literature, that, and so on. Okay, so sometimes the word literature review is not used in the literature that you are examining. Okay, common mistakes to avoid. That's very important. Okay, please, 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 please be careful. Do not use annotated list of previous work. This is the worst ever. See this thing. This is the worst ever. What it is? You give me something like, oh, okay, I found 15 articles discussing 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, article number just saying whatever. Article number 3, article number 4. No, you are giving me a laundry list. You are giving. It's like going to the supermarket and buying. Oh, I need, for instance, chocolate. I need gum. I need fruits. I need bananas. I need. No, no. It is not a laundry list. It is not like a shopping list. It is not a list of. No, you need to have the previous work talking to each other. You need to classify your literature based on the arguments, based on the themes, based on the philosophical background, based on the methodological background. You need to make it more like a classification. So I can now, I see. So there's are 4 or 5 literature that belong to the modernization school. And there is another 5 or 6 pieces of literature that belong to the rational choice model. And then there is another 5, 6 books and articles that belong to the anthropological approach. And there is like 5 or 6 articles that focus more on the psychological aspects. Oh, and there is another 5, 6 schools that focus mainly on economic analysis. All this is you are trying to explain what globalization is. You see, so but don't give me as a list. You see, Mu'taz said, Ahmad said, Ibrahim said, Khalil said, and so no, that's not going to be useful. This is a bibliography. I do not want a bibliography with summary. I want a review. Okay. Another mistake, you don't, you just take anything randomly. You don't take sufficient time to define and identify the most relevant sources to use in the literature review related to your research problem. In other words, you just, oh, it has Iraq, so put Iraq. I'm doing my research on the causes of civil war in Iraq. Okay, so there is Iraq. Okay, but what if the source is talking about, for instance, antiquities in Iraq? History of cooking in Iraq. No, you need to focus on what's most relevant sources in your literature review related to your research problem. Okay? Sometimes a mistake is done when you rely exclusively on secondary analytical sources rather than including primary research studies or data. Sometimes you rely, okay, Mu'taz did a piece of research based on data done by somebody else. So you focus on Mu'taz's research and you don't go to the man or lady who originally found the data. No, I'm sorry, collected the data. No, I need you to include some secondary and some primary studies or data. You need to have both. Okay? Don't act as if. I'm going to actually highlight some of these so you guys understand what I'm talking about. Okay? Don't clearly relate sources in the literature review. I guess. What did I do? There's something missing. Because I play a lot. Yes, here it is. Okay. Don't use annotated. Another mistake are clearly related to your research problem. Underlined. I want this word to be relevant. I need this to be underlined. This is a common mistake, which makes it easy. Okay, I will just focus on others who used the work of others. No, I need you to go to the original source of, I don't know what the thing, yes, it is. Okay, so I need you to use both secondary and primary sources of studies and data. Okay, uncritically accept another researcher's findings. Okay, so XYZ found one. Okay, what about you? He found that. She found that. They found that. Do you accept it? Where is your own contribution? No, I like that. I don't like, but not exactly really like. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's not about I like. No, but I find that convincing or non-convincing. Okay, I find that this is overgeneralization, and I will show you how to do this kind of, how to find flaws. This will be called logical fallacies, how to come up with sound logical analysis, and how to locate ones. In other words, how to find words, how to find fallacies or faults or mistakes in people's logic. Okay? So I want you to examine critically all aspects of research, design, and analysis. Might be, yes, he is partially right, or she is partially right, but not fully right. There was a hasty generalization here. She overgeneralized, or he overgeneralized. Yeah, this might be applicable to Western Europe, but not applicable to Eastern Europe. Yes, this might, you see, we say that, for instance, I want to measure religiosity, to what extent people are committed to religious beliefs based on reading the Holy Book. Okay, but you know what? Reading the Holy Book is important in some cultures. In other cultures, people don't read, listen. You see, like listen, look at Egyptians. Egyptians might not read the Quran, but maybe day and night listening to Al-Quran Al-Kareem radio station. You see, so some things might be applicable to certain cultures and others are not applicable to certain. So we might say that when I conceptualize the term religiosity, or to what extent a person is religious, I defined it to mean that people who are committed to the rituals. And I'll be measuring it through 2 or 3 techniques. One of them, to what extent people read their spiritual book. And then you come to Egyptians and say, you know what, most Egyptians are not religious in this sense. Based on this definition, I'm going to tell you, there is an issue of validity in your conceptualization. I'll talk about that later when we go to conceptualization. But I mean here, okay, this piece of research is wrong. Why? Because Egyptians might not be really reading the Holy Quran as much, but they are listening to it. And when you ask them in your survey, for instance, or in your focus group discussion, how many times you read the Quran, most people say rarely read the Quran. But as you ask them how many times read or listen to the Quran, you're going to find lots of people saying, yeah, I listen. I cannot start my day without listening. Yeah, not reading. But listen, you see, that's where you're going to see, I need your critical mind when you read things. So here somebody is saying that the more religious people are, the less likely they are to be pluralistic and accept different point of views and accept something. Okay, but you mismeasured religiosity here. Okay, you don't tell me what you did in the literature review. You just give me this annotated list. No, I need you. You said methodologically, I'm going to make a distinction between those pieces of research that were done using normative analysis or theoretical analysis, those that used qualitative research, and those that belong to the quantitative technique. Okay, so I need you to tell me what you are going to do when you are doing your literature review. I need to know what your research procedures. How did you find this literature as well? including say I'm going to do JSTOR, I'm going to go to the library, I'm going to rely on Muse project, I'm going to do Scholar, Google Scholar, and I'm going to differentiate them into the four. Some people, when they do literature review, they come up with this interesting mistake, which is to report isolated statistical results rather than synthesizing them in chi-square or meta-analytic methods and so on. Meaning what? You just do it as if like those like 15 pieces of research did 1, 2, 3, and sometimes I would say that, oh, there was a mistake using, or in this researcher used chi-square, while actually he should have used regression. Or this guy used correlation, Pearson correlation, while he should have been using strongman correlation, and so on. You might suggest different technique. You see, I need to see somebody using logit or propet, not OLS regression, and so on. So you might, if you're doing quantitative research, you might as well to critique the technique used in quantitative research and quantitative analysis. Only includes research that validates assumption and does not consider contrary findings and alternative interpretation found in the literature, as if all your mission is to report to me what those people who are saying good things about Egypt and people who are critical of Egyptian political regime, you just ignore them. No, I don't want to do anything or consider any literature that discusses the drawbacks, the minuses of what's happening in Egypt after 1213 revolution. Oh no, there are some people who call it coup d'etat. No, I'm not going to review this literature. It goes against my beliefs. No, you cannot do that. It is not up to you. You need to consider everything. You might say there is a group of literature or some literature that is pro what happened in 2013 revolution, and they call it a revolution, and this is their arguments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and there are a group of people who are anti this and actually believe that this was a negative thing and this was a democratic breakdown, and they call it a coup d'etat. Okay, and this is their arguments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And your role as a researcher is as people. This kind of literature is done based on, you can call it thematic analysis or philosophical analysis, ended up being pro the revolution. And this group of people or group of literature did another a normative analysis saying that no, it is a coup d'etat. My role as an empiricist, or the role of this piece of paper as an empirical paper, is actually to run a survey on a group of students and ask them, what do they see it? Okay, so it is not now, it's like unsettled debate between two groups of people who are saying, one is saying that's a revolution, another group is saying, no, it is not a revolution, it's a coup d'etat. Okay, what Egyptian students think? Okay, and I'm Egyptian university students, and I'm going to apply that to 4 universities, 2 governmental and 2 non-governmental, 1 in urban area, 1 in rural area, of course, and be careful, because we're going to do that later on. Do not overgeneralize about everybody. No, you are not talking about all Egyptians. You are talking about Egyptian university students in 4 universities. So this is not representative of everybody. It is illustrative of a sect of Egyptian university students. You cannot overgeneralize. But what I'm saying is, you cannot just do the following. I'm going to only do the literature review of those who think that what happened on June 30th, 2013, think that it is a coup d'etat, because I do not like Sisi. I do not like what happened then. So I'm just going to focus my research, focus my literature review on those who think it was a coup d'etat. You cannot do that. Okay, you cannot do that. What you can do is to see both types or both categories of literature. You know what? I forgot. Some people ignore. This is another mistake. The bibliography. I'm sorry. Bibliography of other research. You know what the bibliography is? That is the list of references used by X in his or her research. This bibliography can be very rich, can help you actually, can take you from one step to the other to the other. Because I can start from a most recent book or an article written on a specific topic. This is what I usually do. I'm not asking you to do like me, but this is one of the things that I usually do. What is the most recent book or article written on my topic? Something like written 5 or 6 months ago. Okay, I will go and read it and read its bibliography, because the bibliography is telling me that this is the most relevant according to the author of this book or article till now. Of course, I'm not going to entirely depend on this bibliography, but this is a sign. If it is acceptable for a publication, the thesis has been published, then most likely it is a thorough bibliography. So use the bibliography of others' literature. It will guide you through all that. Okay. I just have an example here. I don't know if this. I guess you need to have JSTOR from university to be able to see what I have in here right now. But the idea is these two authors are simply saying no Arab bourgeoisie, then no democracy. The entrepreneurial middle class and democratic attitudes since Arab Spring. Actually, from the minute they start their paper, they are saying Barrymore statement, no bourgeoisie, no democracy, is one of the most famous maxims in comparative politics. Since these words first appeared in 1966, the link between blah, blah, blah. And then they keep going, saying that, oh, okay, so all these people have been, we begin by analyzing the results from 3 waves parameters surveys. You see, so here is they are showing me what they will be doing and so on. Then democracy and private sector. You know what? This is the literature review. This is their literature review. Okay? And here they're saying our study helps fill a gap in the democracy literature. Okay? So their study, there is a gap in the literature by providing insights about the political attitudes of Arab world's entrepreneurial middle class, specifically in reactions to Arabs and so on. You see? And then you can move on to see how they started to quote others. You see, each one, you see a footnote here. This is some kind uh, of citation to a literature that is reviewed. Eva Bellin explores whether and when capitalists and labor support democratization in developing countries. So here, so what did this bill, Eva Bellin, what did Bellin say or find? Bellin proposed that capitalist support for democracy relies and so on. You see, although Bellin's study has many virtues, it is difficult to apply her argument to the developing world's into middle class and so on. So here they exist. You see, they understood what she said and they started to say, oh yeah, we understand what she said. She is partially right. But it's very difficult to apply her argument to the developing world's into the middle class. For one, this is one reason, many members of the entrepreneur and so on. You see, what I'm saying here is that you need to exist in the literature review. I need to see you there, making comments, accepting, rejecting, and so on. You see, for instance, what then might be we expect from middle class members of the private sector. On the one hand, they often are disadvantaged in authoritarian systems, that is private sector. People are disadvantaged, meaning they are not getting their rights. They lack the wealth and connections of crony capitalists. Crony capitalists are the people who work with the government, or capitalists who are very close to the government, so some kind of corruption. Okay, thus democracy would theoretically give them more voice. Okay, they also tend blah blah blah. So Here they keep talking about that, but then they give a specific names. You see Rushheimer and Haber and Haber Stevens and John Stevens found that Europe's urban and rural, and they show us how this group of researchers found something different, and so on. What I'm saying is you need to look at the literature before so this until here there are 16 quotes here, 15, 14, 13. All these are literature that were done by researchers done before, and you need to show how relevant they are to you and what you will be doing different from all that. Research in Jordan and Morocco find that non-elite businessmen pursue the path of least resistance for achieving their individual business interests. Okay, this is the quote, only very narrow, very small quote, just to show that, okay, those people of businessmen who are not part of the elite usually show at the least resistance for achieving their individual business, meaning that they are trying to cope with what's happening. Okay, and then the footnote is here. Okay, so what I did here today is simply to show you how you can do your literature review in this way. I'm going to pass to our colleagues something that I wrote. You can just see how I do literature review when I do my research. Again, I'm not the best example. Your supervisor is the one in charge of guiding you around, but keep that in mind, keep what I said in mind, because that's almost, like, I wouldn't say consensus, but most researchers do in political science and social sciences in general. This is one of the toughest sessions, because literature review usually is an important aspect of how you will do or pursue your research afterwards. Next session, we will talk about how to make sure that your analysis is strong, how to find mistakes and errors in other researchers' work, how to avoid these mistakes and imperfections in your own research. Thank you very much. See you next session.